She had every reason to turn away. Her husband was dead. Her future was uncertain. The only hope that she had was to go to a foreign land. And yet, she looks at her mother-in-law and says, "Your God will be my God." This is the story of Ruth. Hey folks, I'm Pastor Eric Tritten from Gloria Lutheran Church in Hudson, Ohio, and this is a weekly word. I'm glad you're with me. We have been working our way through some stories of the Judges. And we're going to continue to be in that time of the Judges, but not talking about one of the judges in particular today. We're going to look at a story about a family that had to move from Israel at this time because there was a famine. In fact, the story begins like this. It says, in the days of when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab with his wife. His wife's name was Naomi, and their 2 sons. Now, maybe if you're a Christian, your ears perked up when I mentioned Bethlehem. Yeah, it's the same Bethlehem that we talk about at Christmas time, and that's going to come into the story a little bit later here. But the word Bethlehem, then that name literally means house of bread. And there's an irony to this at this point, because in the house of bread, there is no bread. There's a famine. They don't have food. And so this family decides, well, we better go someplace else where maybe we can get the food that we need. And they decide to go to a neighboring country, and they're going to stay there for a while. And that country is Moab. And they stay there for 10 years. And a lot happens in 10 years. Their boys grew up. They fell in love with Moabite girls, and they married them. Those girls' names were Orpah and Ruth. Now, time went on, and in those 10 years, all 3 of the men died. Now, we might hear that and go, well, how? The text doesn't actually tell us. I think that sometimes when we look back at these texts, it's really hard to imagine the dangers of this period of history. As we were talking through the Judges, there's a lot of violence in those stories. There was a lot of war and combat that was going on. It's easy to get swept up into those things. There could be things as simple as somebody got a cut and got an infection. There's no such thing as antibiotics at this time, any of that. So there are lots of different ways that people could die at that time. And all 3 men died. And this is really significant because there's no social security, there's no social network, and women, widows, were particularly vulnerable, as you don't have a husband, a provider, any of that for your life. And soon after this, Naomi learns the Lord had visited his people and had given them food. So she decides, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. I'm going to go back to my family. I'm going to go return to these relatives in Bethlehem, and they have an obligation to provide for me and to take care of me. And in my old age, they will take care of me. And Orpah and Ruth say, we'll come too. We love you, Naomi. We're coming along. And Naomi looks at them and says, girls, I love you, but you know that if somehow by some miracle God were to give me sons tonight, are you really going to wait for them to grow up and marry them? You're young. Go back to your families, get married, have kids, enjoy the good gifts of life. And they clung to her, and she urged them. And Orpah says, yeah, I'll go. But it says Ruth clings to her. And she insists that she will not leave Naomi. She says, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. And I think one of the things that we see in Ruth that we did not see in Orpah is that Ruth must have come to faith. Remember that at this time, when you talk about different nations, you start talking about different gods in those different lands. And so for these Israelites to come with the message of the one true God, Ruth must have heard that message through her husband, through her mother-in-law, who knows, but she heard that message and she came to faith. She was converted by the good news of who this God is. And so when Naomi says, I'm going back, she says, I'm coming too. Not only does she love Naomi, but she loves the Lord. You know, when you look at the gods of Moab, there's a huge contrast between their primary God and the God of Israel. The primary god of Moab was a god called Molech. And Molech actually required infant sacrifices. And there were times that people were to bring an infant from their family and to feed that living child into the flames of the altar to Molech. And Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, he never asks for human sacrifices. He never asks for us to kill our children for his glory, for his satisfaction. In fact, when we read through the rest of the Bible, we find out that he's going to give his own son in order to save us. And Ruth experienced the love and the mercy of the Lord from the Old Testament in a whole different way, and says, this is my God, and I believe in him. And so she goes back with Naomi, and she goes to Bethlehem. Now, when they get there, the people recognize Naomi, and they welcome her, and they say, oh, Naomi is here. We're so glad to see you again. And the word Naomi, it means comfort. And Naomi says, you know, I'm not a comfortable person anymore. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Because God has been bitter with me, and I've lost my husband, and I've lost my sons. And here we are, we're two widows, and we have nothing. Well, that's not completely true. When they come back to Bethlehem, they do have a social system that's set up to protect them. And as widows, it was expected under God's law that there would be provision for them, and that there would be people who would help them and care for them out of the generosity that God had provided to them. God would give through them to them. And one of the people that God is going to use to do that is a man named Boaz. And Boaz is going to have a unique relationship with Naomi and Ruth. And we're going to spend some time looking at that next week. But one of the things that I want to think about as I think about Ruth and Naomi going back to Bethlehem is this idea of shunning the gods of this world and turning away from the ways of this world. Ruth had to leave everything behind in order to follow God. And she did that because in God, she saw something better than what the world could offer. She experienced God's love and his mercy. As Christians, we have received something better than this world can offer. And we have experienced God's love and his mercy through the cross, through Jesus' death and his resurrection. And I think that sometimes as Christians, we want to live in the comforts of this world without the repentance, the turning away from the things of the world to follow God. And that's really not good for us. This is nothing new. The saints of old talked about this type of a feeling inside of us. In fact, St. Augustine once said that he prayed to God to make him chaste, but not yet. You know, he wanted to continue to enjoy the pleasures of this life. But to leave the things of this world behind is actually a good thing. To live in a way that we hold on to them lightly and we receive them as gifts that God gives to use for our benefit, but also for the benefit of others. It's a good and a blessed thing when our hearts are focused on the love of God and the way that the love of God shapes us and transforms us. So we're going to talk more about Ruth next week. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, like it, share it, subscribe, and please come back next week and we're going to talk about Ruth and Boaz.